went out on the water yesterday and had a little issue after hitting a boat wake. Snapped the transom in half. Now you can see the wood was old, but we hadn't had an issue and had taken the boat out many times. So I'm going to have to undo all this and pull the engine with a shop crane, I guess, an engine hoist, and then rebuild this transom and then redo the bracketing here. And I don't know if I'm going to have to weld anything or what, but yeah, that was quite a surprise to have the engine almost fall into the Gulf. And hopefully it was in the water, but hopefully it still runs. I don't know. I guess we'll find out once I get it all taken apart and see what happens. Fortunately, the carburetor stayed out of the water, but this part of the engine was sitting in the water here, so well, I guess I'll have to get a crane, pull the engine off of it, and we'll start going from there. I went to Harbor Freight and bought myself a 1-ton shop crane. Took a few hours to put it together, and we'll see how it works. Outboard engines typically have some sort of a lifting eye on top of them or a way to attach one. So I needed to hook that up and then remove the control cables, including the ignition cables, the shift linkage, and the throttle. When we put the boat onto the trailer, it kind of caught the prop between one of the side pieces of the trailer, so I had to remove the prop in order to get the engine free. The engine was pretty wedged in there, so I used some ratcheting tie-down straps to help me move it. I thought the rear of the engine had gone into the water and that the salt water may have gotten into the connectors, so I pulled everything apart and sprayed it with WD-40 to try to drive out the moisture and keep it from corroding further. Next, I had to disconnect the steering cable and pull out the steering arm.
Just a few more connections onto the starter and the solenoid. This is the part that had me worried the most. All the connections that are inside this case I feared got wet. And everything did get wet. You can see that there's salt corrosion on that rectifier, the thing with the fins on it, and all these other connections had water in them. Fortunately, the capacitor discharge ignition box is sealed in epoxy, so I don't think anything got to that. I had just replaced that as well. And the last step before pulling the engine was to remove the old mangled transom brackets. A few more pumps of the jack. Safety first. The old transom brackets were pretty destroyed, so I got metal to make new ones. I'm just going to have to weld them together and bolt them into place. This was a 2-inch transom, but I'm going to make a 3-inch wide, or 3-inch thick rather, transom to give it some more stability. You can see rot on the bottom of the wood, but ironically, the part that broke was still pretty solid, which led me to believe that we had a collision with something underwater. And finally, I just have to unbolt the broken transom piece off of the outboard. Those bolts had seen better days and they had lots of corrosion, so I sprayed them with some PB Blaster and used my impact and was able to get everything apart. I'm going to try to replicate the dimensions of the old transom and put them onto a sheet of 3/4 inch marine plywood, and then I'm going to do a 4-ply layer and cover everything in epoxy. Once I have the new brackets designed, I'm also going to allow some space to put in a cover of aluminum to protect the wood as well. And I'm going to do it on both sides, so it's going to be 4 plies of plywood encased in aluminum and then bolted into place. Should last for another 30 years. Once I had the old piece of transom off of the outboard bracket, I found 2 Zerk fittings that were previously inaccessible. You never know what kind of things you're going to find living inside your transom bracket. I also noticed a piece of the bracket there on the bottom was broken off. I don't know when that occurred or how important that was, but it was definitely missing. I pulled apart the pieces of the transom so you can see the damage. There was some rot and decay on the bottom of the wood, but the part that broke was still solid, as well as the brackets being pretty mangled. Led me to believe that we did, in fact, hit something. In the next video, I'm going to fabricate the new transom brackets and laminate the piece of wood and put it all together, and then install it into the boat. The new metal that I got is a much heavier gauge, and also the channel that the 4-ply transom is going to go into is wider. This should make it much stronger than the original, and we'll be able to get another 30 years out of it.